To vote or not to vote? That is not even really the question, but it's something that many pose as we enter another enthralling presidential election cycle. We're just now this week between the DNC and the RNC's national convention. Last week, the Democratic National Party national convention was held. This coming week, the Republicans will look to outdo them with their show, their itinerary, their platform, their Republican superstars. Like I said, we're in the midst of the presidential election season where some love one option, some love another, some love neither. And some are gung ho. Some are gung ho to vote. Others are lukewarm, and others don't care and will not. And the question here is that a problem? Is that a problem? Should we vote? Should we rock the vote? If Jesus was alive today, would he vote? Well, let's just look at that one question. I don't want to get off into the ancillary issues of who to vote for or what, some of the issues at hand, but simply ask, should you vote, and how important is it for you to vote? Voting is the way certain laws are enacted, right? How the executive branch, the legislative branch, and in some places how your judges and magistrates are selected. It's the way the people, the citizens can voice their opinions and how they may want their government to operate, and specifically by whom. These people and processes determine how the government, to whom we pay taxes, sets the agenda and the narrative for the municipalities, the counties, the cities, the states, the federal government. For that alone, for those details alone, voting does matter. If you're a college student, they help to determine what your tuition is, what you're going to pay for, how much that reimbursement check might be if we have a pandemic. If you're out of college, obviously they dictate how much your Social Security, how much your Social Security taxes are going to be, and frankly, whether you're going to receive Social Security going down the line. They determine everything from policies that endorse whether Black Lives Matter or really whether they're indifferent or they don't. Whether women have the right to vote or whether they're not. Issues of global warming, the Paris Treaty, pandemic relationships with Russia, with China, pandemic response, cyber terrorism. I can go on and on and on and on with the issues, but voting matters because the people we put in place help to dictate the policies by which our governments, city up to federal, govern. Now, the Bible doesn't specifically say, thou shalt vote. It doesn't. But it does give us a couple of windows into God's sentiment, and then, frankly, how Jesus' disciples, how he engaged with Moses on how people should function in groups when they need leadership. Right? God told the Israelites after they'd escaped from Egypt, very specifically, select capable men from among the people. And what was capable? He specifically said, God-fearing, trustworthy men who are averse to dishonest gain. Let me repeat that. He stated, God-fearing, we're supposed to select from the people, God-fearing, trustworthy men who are averse to dishonest gain. Appoint them over the people as the leaders of thousands, hundreds, and fifties, and tens. Right? That's Exodus 18:21. He goes on in Deuteronomy 1:13 and 14 and says, choose from yourselves wise, understanding, and respected men from each of your tribes, and I will appoint them as your leaders. So we're supposed to have good leaders. Now, he didn't say that all of our leaders will be good, but we are supposed to elect good leaders. And it goes on to define what good leaders are: those who are out to lead the people. They're God-fearing and they're not out for personal gain. Okay. I think we forget that Jesus had 12 disciples, right? When he walked the earth, he had 12 disciples. But once Judas betrayed him, he had 11. And per the book of Psalms, Peter noted in Acts 1:21, may another take his place of leadership, right? Speaking specifically about the void created by Judas when he betrayed Jesus. And he goes on in Acts 1:21, therefore it is necessary to choose one of the men who have been with us the whole time the Lord Jesus was living among us. And beginning from John's baptism to the time when Jesus was taken up from us, from one of these must become a witness with us of his resurrection. So they nominated two men, Joseph, called Barsabbas, also known as Justus, that's coincidental, and Matthias. Then they prayed, Lord, you know everyone's heart. Show us which one of these two you have chosen. So we are to select capable men from among the people, God fearing, trustworthy men who are averse to dishonest gain, right? As he told Moses. And appoint them over the people for hundreds, thousands, fifties, and so forth. At every level, at every level, from national to state and down, we are to select capable men. And when I say men here, I'm meaning men and women. God fearing, trustworthy men who are averse to dishonest gain. And as Peter recites here, the qualifications for taking on the discipleship role were men who were basically down with Christ during his earthly walk. Again, God-fearing, trustworthy men. The revolution in this country, the United States, the revolution in this country, people forget we are a country that was birthed via revolution. The revolution in this country started in large part because of taxation without representation. The motto of the Tea Party, no, not the short-lived anti-Obama political party, but the 18th century movement, the 1700s. The term has its origin, taxation without representation, has the origin in the slogan of American colonials during British rules. In other words, we pay taxes. Our voices should be heard. Our voices matter. The U.S. Constitution now didn't include voting rights, but it's been amended numerous times to memorialize the rights of people in the 15th, 19th, and 26th Amendment. The 15th Amendment in February 3rd to February 3rd, 1870, which prohibited the denial of a person's right to vote based on race. The 19th Amendment, which prohibited the denial of the right to vote based on sex, and which was enacted on August 18th, 1920. 1920, not 1820. And the 26th Amendment, check this out, which wasn't enacted until July 1st, 1971, which prohibited the denial of the right to vote based on age. So race, sex, age. We've got a struggled and long history here in the United States with protecting people's rights to vote. But it's a long road that's been traveled, but it is so endorsed. It's so integral. It's such an integral part to our freedoms. Yeah, just as much as the right to freedom of speech, the freedom of the right to bear arms, the right to the right to vote is a protected right of American citizens. Now, just a quick, did you know something I learned during this? Thomas Mundy Patterson of Perth Amboy, New Jersey, became the first black person to vote under the authority of the 15th Amendment. And I state this because for black Americans gaining the rights of citizenship, and now frankly for all citizens, but specifically, I'm talking about the African American experience, gaining the full rights of citizenship, and especially the right to vote, was central to securing true freedom and self-determination. Now, slavery is not abolished until the black man has the ballot. Those were words of Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass stated this May 1865. A month after the Union victory at Appomattox, which basically foretold the end of the Civil War. Despite the 15th Amendment, though, blacks were systematically denied exercising the right to vote, especially in the South. Literacy tests, poll taxes, and other methodologies were used to suppress the black vote. Jim Crow laws were part of the framework of the statutes of the southern states, which began enacting these in the 1890s to legalize racial discrimination and enforce white supremacy following Reconstruction. Reconstruction was how the South was reshaped after the Civil War, allowing black people to integrate into society. And as a means, or as a pendulum swing, as a means of backlash against that, Jim Crow laws were enacted in many southern states, totally halting the rise of the African American communities. So it truly wasn't until 1965, 55 years ago, that legal barriers were outlawed at the state and local levels, which legal barriers to voting were outlawed. And that's the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This law was actually signed into act by Lyndon B. Johnson on August 6, 1965. And it aimed to overcome all legal barriers at the state and local levels that denied African Americans the rights to vote under the 15th Amendment. Now, the act banned the use of literacy tests and poll taxes, provided for oversight of federal registration in areas with less than than 50% of the non-white population had not registered to vote, and authorized the U.S. Attorney General to investigate the use of poll tax in state and local elections. In 1964, the 24th Amendment made poll taxes in the federal elections and poll taxes in state elections illegal. It banned them. And by 1966, so did the Supreme Court. Now, there have been revisions, expirations, alterations in voting rights, but my point here is simply that this country has a long and struggled history with ensuring and protecting people's rights to vote, but we've continued to fight the fight because the founding principles of this country were for fair and equal representation. The Revolutionary War, the Civil War, the War for Civil Rights require the right to vote without infringement. Education, environmental issues, gun control, healthcare, immigration, border control, technology, the economy, minimum wage, infrastructure, foreign policy, cybersecurity, campaign finance, electoral reform, Black Lives Matter, abortion, criminal justice reform. These are issues. They affect us all. How much money will be spent on highways? How much will they spend on increasing broadband to rural communities or overly populated cities that don't have the bandwidth they need? College debt, relationship recognition, relationships with our international brothers and brethren country, NATO, the Paris Treaty, healthcare. I can go on and on and on and on and on. But these are issues that require us to vote because voting matters. Jesus charged the disciples with going forth and making disciples to the world, right? And when they were charged with replacing Judas, they required that person, the person that they selected, be someone who walked with Jesus. How did they decide on who that disciple was going to be? They voted. As far as I can tell, all 11 voted. They all voted. They voted for Matthias, who had followed Jesus since the baptism by John. Matthias had put in his time in preparing for the role. Now, I don't want to go down that path. They voted for Matthias, and because he had put in time preparing for the role. But some say, it doesn't matter. My vote doesn't count. It doesn't matter who's in office. But the numbers speak. In 2012, Florida and Ohio were decided by 2 percentage points or less. The difference in the 2016 election in Michigan, 0.3%. In New Hampshire, 0.4%. In Pennsylvania, 1.2%. Those are the percentages that determined who won those states. A swing of the electoral votes that would have determined the election. Cumulatively, that 0.3 in Michigan, that 0.4 in New Hampshire, that 1.2 in Pennsylvania, that's 1.9% of the votes in those states, which amounts to less than, if I'm not mistaken, less than 1,000 people. That came out to less than 2 votes per county. Every vote counts. Now, the site, which every vote counts, states, if around half of Americans chose to vote, it is difficult to claim that any elected official truly represents the will of people or has a clear mandate to carry out politics. Yeah, I mean, if less than half the people vote, then you only know what half the people want. So it's hard to determine what the population wants and or needs. If citizens don't vote, though, they relinquish their right to representative government. A democratic government draws its strength, it draws its legitimacy from the citizens who elect it. And this legitimacy is threatened when few citizens exercise their democratic right to vote. It is a responsibility of the government and the American people to identify the obstacles to voting and find ways to make the electoral process more efficient and accessible so that our democracy can function as intended, as needed. The site also states that, that's where the site ends. Now, a vote though, what is a vote? A vote is a choice. It's an express choice. It is our way of participating in the governing process. As citizens, we do not generally write, enforce, or interpret laws, but we vote to put people in place to advance the laws, adopt them, and apply them. When we don't exercise our right to vote, we fail to exercise our right to elect capable people, God-fearing, trustworthy men and women who are averse to dishonest gain. I personally don't believe that if you don't vote, you don't have a voice. Then you need to shut up. And that, though I do firmly believe we should vote, it doesn't mean vote or shut up, because by merely the fact that we're all created in the image of God, or frankly, very brass tacks, you're a taxpayer or someone pays taxes on your behalf. You have a right to representation, which means you have a right to vote. You have a right to speak. But when you fail to vote, you have left governance totally to someone else. You have given up the power of your voice, despite the efforts of those scores of people who have toiled so that you can participate in the selection of our governing people and policies. You make it more difficult for the candidate you think might be best to represent you to win. You're relying on other people to do what you can and diminishing the power of your voice. At a time where people are all about exercising rights, my right to not wear a mask, my right to bear arms, my right to freedom of speech, how better to express your right to how better to express your speech than to vote? Like freedom of speech, it's a constitutional right in America that allows you to make your voice heard. Your one vote may not seem like a lot, but what if most people stayed home? Eventually, our government would crumble. Now, Jesus didn't vote, but no one in the Roman Empire did. The Caesar, who was the emperor of the Roman kingdom, ruled as a king would. So anyone who disagreed with him was imprisoned and put to death. However, Jesus taught his followers to do everything they could to make the world a better place, right? He wants us to do the same. I mean, point blank. Now, the way we get there, I think we have off kilter many times. And it's not governments who are responsible for everything in the world to make ourselves better, make life better. But if there are ways that we can affect positive change, we should. He wants us to do the same. He wants us to make the world a better place. And the way that we can, one way that we can, is by voting. When Jesus was asked if it was right to pay taxes to Caesar, how did he reply? He replied, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." In other words, do your civic responsibility, do your civic duty. Just do it, just so it doesn't conflict with God. Do your civic duty. Your vote is required for your voice to count. If your voice doesn't count, democracy fails. Rock the vote. Elections are determined only by the people who vote, not by those who don't. If you're 18, make sure you are registered to vote. If you're not 18, make sure your parents, your aunts, your uncles, your teachers, the grocery store person, if you're not 18, make sure they vote. Is it important to vote? Absolutely. Our vote counts because our voices matter.